Thank you very much. Good afternoon to everyone. I bring you warm greetings from the Philippines. It's much warmer there. Laudato si, mi Signore. Praise be to you, O Lord. The encyclical of the Holy Father is supposed to be an encyclical leading us to praise God for God's goodness in creation. But when we look around us, look at the planet, look at the poor, some of us will probably ask, what is there to praise God about? So the encyclical is also an invitation for us to act so that humanity and creation would be a living song of praise to God once again. In many parts of the world, families try to survive in the midst of poisonous waste and pollution. They exist on a tight rope between floods and droughts. Life seems to be strangled from the time children are born. But in wealthier parts of the world, people often consume and throw away resources, seemingly mindful only of their own needs. Both scenarios could exist in the same country. Even in my own part of the world, I witness how overconsumption and waste inflict wounds on Mother Earth and take precious resources away from the poor. Indeed, the urgent cry of the earth and the cry of the poor call for our intent hearing. The church in different parts of the world and Catholic organizations witness daily, along with the rest of humankind, the effects of the degradation of our natural and social environments, like the lack of access to water. We even have to buy water to drink. Why should we? Lack of access to land and food, disasters provoked by extreme climatic conditions. You have seen the effects of the typhoon Haiyan that hit the Philippines, illnesses, premature deaths, the loss of biodiversity, and extreme poverty. As a priest, one of my most horrific experiences was to preside at the funeral of 2 children who died after eating chicken that their father picked up from the trash bin. What do you say? What do you celebrate? All this is in large measure due to a model of growth that is not sustainable either for people or for nature, a growth that excludes the poor. A truly sustainable development centered on the human person, especially the outcast, can only be promoted by a renewed culture of personal encounter and fraternal love. These are not statistics. They are human persons whose hands we should touch, whose tears we should see, whose cries we should hear. And it can be promoted also by an economic vision based on solidarity, caring for the ecology, fair trade, ethical finance, and the promotion of the common good. In his warmly received encyclical Laudato Si, Pope Francis called each of us to enter into a dialogue, even a debate, on caring for the earth, our common home, and to undertake a mission to save it by restoring our right relationship with God, with the human family, especially the poor. The Pope asks what kind of world we want to leave to our children and the generations after them. 2015 is a crucial year for humanity. 3 significant multilateral processes are taking place that will set the tone for development for the years to come. First, financing for development. Second, the sustainable development. Third, action to tackle climate change. Here in New York, we have just witnessed the completion of the second of the three major multilateral moments. The Sustainable Development Goals were agreed upon yesterday. Is that true? Yes. An important piece of international policy is now in place and should be implemented collaboratively and constructively by listening to the experiences, priorities, and perspectives of people with direct experience of poverty, marginalization, and injustice. That's the beginning of implementation. Listen to the victims. We welcome all the goals, but especially the new ones, which address some of the most pressing challenges of our times, such as SDG 12 on responsible production and consumption, and SDG 13 on taking action on climate change. However, one important stream of negotiations is still underway, with attention now focused on the 21st Conference of the Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change that will take place in Paris in December 2015. We urge the parties to agree on a fair and lofty or ambitious outcome. Pope Francis's new encyclical could not have been published at a more timely moment. Recognizing that the negotiations on climate change has become stagnant, the encyclical challenges all of us, but especially the political leaders, to review critically what is commonly accepted as human progress and to consider the authentic well-being of our human family, the poor, and the planet. This deeply human concern affecting concrete persons must be addressed with political will. Now, we know that the climate negotiations in Paris could well be the last effective opportunity to negotiate an agreement to keep humanly induced rise in global temperature between 1.5 degrees centigrade. But Pope Francis goes beyond this by saying that the establishment of a legal framework which can set clear boundaries and ensure the protection of ecosystems has become indispensable. Our earnest desire and hope is for a fair and binding global agreement on climate change that has the needs of the world's poorest and most vulnerable people at its heart. The long-term goal to stay below 1.5 degrees is crucial if we truly care for our common home and for the poor. This goal has to be matched by action now, before and beyond 2020. Let us not wait for 2020. It should have mechanisms which allow us to monitor and elevate the level of accomplishment through review cycles, rather than being content with low levels of achievement. Minimalism. It also means moving away from economic models exclusively based on fossil fuel extraction and consumption to sustainable, affordable, and inclusive energy systems and economies which ensure participation, equality, and equity at all levels. We need new models of development that would not harm the climate further and would lift people out of poverty. And please, poor communities need to be consulted about the development that they desire and the development that is beneficial to them. Sometimes development becomes an ideology imposed on them from the outside. Central to all of this is ending the fossil fuel era, phasing out fossil fuel emissions, and phasing in 100% renewables with sustainable energy accessible to all. Integral ecology, according to Pope Francis, where our concern for the environment goes hand in hand with the preferential love of the poor and the search for the common good, demands a human rights-based approach in the Paris Agreement. In particular, to ensure the right of every person to have access to adequate food at all times. We hope an agreement will be reached to recognize the primacy of food security for all. Recalling the 2 children who died, I asked myself, why would food first become trash to become food for the poor? What a scandal. What a scandal. As Archbishop Gallagher also mentioned, an ecological debt is owed by the global north to the global south, according to the Holy Father, due to the disproportionate use of natural resources by certain countries over long periods of time, resulting in the economic imbalances and inequalities we see today. This debt, which is also intergenerational, must be recognized and settled by those who possess more power to effect change, by cutting gas emissions and by providing climate finance. At least 50% of public finance should go towards helping developing countries meet their adaptation needs. Without these reparations, it is not fair to ask from the poor who are most severely affected by climate change to do more. Although we as Catholics should be hopeful, we are not naive. Political processes, though necessary, are inadequate in solving problems related to creation. That's why Pope Francis calls us to an ecological conversion. Everyone is called to that. Everyone has a role to play. With God's grace, we must free ourselves with what is negative, wasteful, and violent, and enter into a dialogue with our global family. This requires a process of global communication, listening in truth, a global examination of conscience, a global recognition of failures and guilt, a global resolve to fight the harm already done. We need to see our common human vocation to live with and for the family of creation as stewards and not as proud owners. We are not owners. We are just caretakers. This requires that we be energetic, driven, and creative, but never domineering and abusive. That's why Pope Francis challenges us to review our values and lifestyles. He calls for a culture of global solidarity, where those who historically have consumed more may restrain themselves, self-restraint, per favore, so that by living simply, others may have the means to simply live. No more limits. They always say bottomless or sky is the limit. Back to limits. Self-restraint. We need to recover gratitude, generosity, caring, nurturing, sharing as antidotes to unbridled accumulation and individualism. As we witness the horrific flow to Europe of people fleeing from war and oppression, and we see something similar in Asia too, we also are encouraged when we see the healing power of solidarity in the warm welcome and generous support from people across the globe. As Pope Francis wrote in the encyclical, we are faced not with two separate crises, one environmental and the other social, but rather with one complex crisis, which is both social and environmental. I think I have 1 minute to go. Self-restraint. We have laid down the challenge to world leaders and decision makers. I respectfully and humbly call upon all of you in this room, attending the historic 70th General Assembly at the United Nations, to use whatever influence or authority you may possess to arrive at decisions that will set humanity on a different path. You are gifted communicators. You are people of goodwill with access to those who could effect change. As Pope Francis stated, reducing greenhouse gases requires honesty, courage, and responsibility, above all on the part of those countries which are more powerful and, unfortunately, pollute the most. True statecraft is manifest when, in difficult times, we uphold high principles and think of long-term common good. I know and I trust that in this room, in this conference center, in this great city, there are people with conscience and courage to lead humanity in a new direction. Pope Francis asks, what would induce anyone at this stage to hold on to power only to be remembered for their inability to take action when it is urgent and necessary to do so? If leaders of nations work together decisively in addressing the global climate crisis, their respective nations would come out stronger and better served. Caring for our common home could tear down ideological barriers separating nations and replace them with bridges of mutual concern. COP21 could be the start of a long-term shift in how to tackle climate change. The Catholic Church stands with those who are committed. But after the negotiation in Paris, we will face the need for urgent action. And we as church leaders we admit that we have the role of ensuring that the Christian faithful take to heart the message of Pope Francis's encyclical by promoting a Christian spirituality of ecological integrity. And we invite you, politicians, policymakers, business people, scientists, artists, educators, parents and children, colleagues and families to work together for the common good, respecting the dignity of each person, especially of the poorest and most vulnerable people. May I end with 1 more minute. Some of you might ask, what has the church been doing? I can speak from our experience in the Philippines. First, the churches in the Philippines, the dioceses, have been embarking on formation of communities and leaders in ecological integrity, in disaster mitigation, and disaster preparedness and response within parishes, and by networking with business people, making them realize of their responsibility. Secondly, we have engaged in prophetic action of stopping our investment in companies that have poor records in ecological caring. Caritas and our ecology ministries organize the poor and scavengers so that they could engage in recycling for livelihood. We have issued pastoral letters and even protests against illegal means of fishing, indiscriminate use of the seas, and reclamation of bodies of seas just to construct casinos and so-called entertainment centers. We have joined in the signature drive initiated by the global Catholic climate movement. And finally, we have instituted the season of creation from the 1st of September to October the 4th, leading people to rediscover the spirituality of creation. If we allow God's love to inspire us, our work will show forth that same love, which could transform climactic global warming into a warming of hearts for the poor of the world. Thank you very much.